The Set Free Radio Show. Truth music for East Texas.
Being tuned in, this is the interview with Set Free Radio and J. Warner Wallace here. Best-selling author, cold case detective, DateLine feature, Christian apologist. You know, he's got a lot of wears many hats.
Well, I'm glad to be at least visiting Northeast Texas.
Yes,
That's basically the heart of the country, Northeast Texas.
Yes,
I don't think people understand what Northeast Texas is. You tell them you're going to go to Texas, they've got a view.
Oh yeah,
even like a geographic, even how it's going to look, geographically. But this is the piney woods kind of green side, probably more like Louisiana in some ways, maybe. I don't know, but it certainly is pretty here.
Yeah, it's a nice spot, you know. And this is the whole thing.
And it's not humid here in the summer, and it's not bush. My sons are still. The first time our kids, when they were small, ever saw a cicada. That was enough. I think we got them to come back though for years.
Gigantic mosquitoes and all that.
All that stuff. At least you can feel them landing on you, so they try to carry you away. So that's good.
That's right. And this Texas weather, where it's 70 degrees one day and
I know it was 76 degrees yesterday, and it was 39 today.
Yes. Big snowflakes and everything. So
yeah.
But just to wrap everything up, man, I just wanted to, because like I said, I understand the importance of apologetics.
Yeah. Right.
And, there's a very good quote you have where you talk about $1 apologists. Rather than have $1 million apologists, have a bunch of $1 apologists. Yes. And I think that speaks to a lot of kind of our just everyday Christians. Our kind of responsibility. Part of the Great Commission, and to make a case for sharing our faith, because if you're actually actively out there sharing your faith, you're going to face opposition. You're going to have to be prepared. You're going to have to be ready. Yeah. And so just kind of.
When I first wanted, I used to say this all the time before I ever wrote books. Back when I was working as a detective and serving on youth ministries, and I thought, we don't need another $1 million apologist, because there's a sense like, I could never do that. I don't write books. I don't have a website. Back in those days, there was no one really doing anything on YouTube. So it was kind of like, I just, in order to break it as a $1 million, like you got to be like Lee Strobel or C.S. Lewis. And I used to tell people, we don't need another $1 million apologist. We need $1 million $1 apologist. And that's the way I still see myself. That's the way all of us who are in the church, Christ followers, we need to embrace. This is not an option. Yeah. I think a lot of us feel like, we should communicate the gospel more than we do, because we feel that Great Commission burden, and we feel like, hey, that we're called to be evangelists. But the reality of it is that Paul says in Ephesians 4, it's actually, not everybody is an evangelist or a pastor or a teacher. He says some of you are, some of you are, some of you are. But that means some of us aren't. Yeah. So that's not necessarily maybe how you're gifted, or what the call on God has in your life is to be an evangelist. But Peter doesn't give us that option, right? In 1 Peter 3, he says, hey, all of us are to be able to give the reason for the hope we have in Jesus. And it's going to be different for many people. For a lot of us who are watching this, it may just be your personal experience. But remember that pretty much everyone who believes in God in some form can say they've had an experience that confirmed for them that God is who. So my Mormon family would tell you that they've had an experience, or they were raised in the church. The two most popular answers that Christians give. I've had an experience, or I was raised in the church. So if all of us can do that, Muslims, Mormons, every group can do this, then what would separate us? Like, how do you know your experience and your church is teaching truth? Well, that's where the evidence is really helpful. It doesn't just confirm that, yes, your experience is valid, but it also can help you guard yourself from false experiences that are not grounded in the truth. So that's why I think it's important, and that's why in my first book I wanted to use that $1 million expression, the $1 million apologist, but my literary agent said, no, you're nobody. You can't come out and make it sound like you're criticizing somebody's. And I thought, that's not how I mean it. I don't mean like people are actually making $1 million as an apologist. Trust me, no one's doing that. But it was really more about the value that the church sees. And so I didn't say it in cold case. I didn't write it until I got to forensic faith. But then I was able to say some things I couldn't say before. But the reality of it is we have to make a decision to do more than just trust Christ. We have to make a second decision to be able to defend Christ in a culture. And look, we're in the South right now. And the experience we're having in Northeast Texas is probably different than the experience I have in Los Angeles County. So that to me is a very unchurched environment where there's not a tradition. This is how I could grow up and never know anybody in my family or in my friend set that were Christians, because that's kind of the culture I was living in.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a different challenge. But if as soon as you end up out now on social media, so it turns out that we are no longer kind of a global community in the sense that you have a reach that's well beyond Northeast Texas.
Yeah.
So, and we all do. So then the question becomes, okay, well, what are the new challenges? I actually think that now is the time for us to be able to defend why this is true, because we are going to hold to some very unpopular moral teachings. And this moral teaching is going to be so unpopular that at some point someone's going to say, "What are you such an idiot that you would believe such nonsense?" Or you might question yourself, why do I hold on to these when everything in the culture is telling me that I need to abandon this view and that view and this? Well, that's where I think apologetics can help you stand tall.
That's good, and that kind of even ties into kind of what I was wanting to talk about with, because another one of my favorite apologists is Beckett Cook.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
With him.
Yes.
And I really liked how you brought up the fact that both of y'all had become Christians late.
That's right.
Late in your age, kind of like me.
Yeah.
And it really speaks to me because not having just necessarily grown up in the church, but having that experience with Jesus and being born again, it's like you appreciate it so much more.
No, that's very true. I mean, you don't take it for granted. It's kind of like if you were raised. I love Thai food, right? So we have a lot of Thai food in Southern California because that's how close we are to the Pacific, and so Thai food is huge there, and I love it. But I didn't discover it until I was probably 40, maybe. Maybe I was in my 20s when I first tasted it. But man, I loved it. By the time I was 40, it was a regular part of our going out to dinner. And I thought, if I was raised, if my parents made this for me, I probably wouldn't even appreciate this, right? Exactly. But because I didn't discover it, and it's still rare for me, I don't get it once a month, right? It still is like, wow, it has this special thing for me. And well, I think that when you come into the church late, because you live your whole life without it, that you don't take any minute of it for granted.
Exactly.
And so that's why we have to kind of help ourselves to recognize. So maybe for a lot of people who were raised in the church but never looked at it evidentially, this is a way to jumpstart to see it anew in a way you've never thought of it before that might just reinvigorate the way you see your faith.
And and it just leads to you, a lot of times I've experienced like you talked about, it's just you want to tell everybody about it.
That's right. I just discovered this crazy thing. Look at this little thing I discovered. Yeah. So when's the last time you discovered something about Jesus that you couldn't wait to tell somebody else?
That's good.
That's a very good point.
That's good. Yeah. And if you get that book, you'll have plenty of, I promise you,
that's
interest, or even any of the other books, Cold Case Christianity, Forensic Faith. Yeah. And it's very good information. And like I said, even in my own testimony, it's almost like coming out of the Matrix, like seeing this whole world with a different worldview, and it's just things that you thought were good were not good, are not actually good. The things you thought were important are not really important.
Right. And stuff that you've walked by your whole life and never associated God with that at all. And suddenly you realize, oh, actually that makes total sense. So if Christianity is true and the Bible is true, then it should describe the world the way it really is. Exactly. And if it does, we're going to discover things we had never seen before.
And it makes a lot of sense, and it's definitely, in having children, that's when I'm able to kind of, pour into them.
So how old, did you have kids when you first became a Christian?
No, my daughter was probably 7 or 8, and my son was maybe about 4 or 5.
So you were already a parent, but you weren't a Christian yet.
Yes.
I think that's so interesting because that was true for me too. And I wonder if that is another way that God helps us to see, because the relationship, the father to creation, creator to creation relationship is clearer once you become a father and you understand, this is why so many of the parables of Jesus, the prodigal son, all these things that use a father in a way to even describing God as the Father, it's helpful. And I think that's why, so for some of us, I tell a lot of people who are like, oh, my son, he's not a Christian, he was raised in the church, but he's not a Christian. I always say, well, has he got kids yet? Because it might just be that God uses some of that experience to soften us so that we'll kind of hear this truth.
Exactly. Yeah, and you're right. Like I learned stuff from about God, from just how I feel about my kids, and from the love I see them showing.
So the atheist in me would have said, well, yeah, that's why you believe in God, because you just happen to be taking taking and projecting your view as a father on, but it might just be because there's times when you're communicating to your kids and you are using analogies you think your kids will understand, so they grab the concept. That's all God's doing with us.
Exactly.
And I think that part of that is we're not parents yet, we're not fathers yet, so we don't see. And think about it, in this generation, if you'd have been talking to someone in the first century, if this dude was 15, he might be a father.
Yeah.
These people were getting married at 13, 15, 16, in those ranges.
Yeah.
But now we got people, you could be 36 and still not have kids. So you still aren't in that place where the analogy clicks for you.
Yeah.
So be patient. I think that's part of the process.
Yeah, in God's goodness and mercy, like He will literally wait till you're on your deathbed.
That's right.
On the cross.
And we've both seen that happen.
Exactly.
So
yeah, and just bringing that up and tying it in, that's a perfect segue. Just talking about dad. I know you spoke about your dad. And,
that's right.
Him not being a believer currently.
Right. Right.
Say yet.
So yeah, I've had conversations with my dad, and then there was a couple of years ago where I knew he was never really ever interested in Christianity, but we did have a conversation on the way to Longview. We were coming up here to go to a bike shop, and I took advantage. I just thought I just got to be as clear and as it's not about persuasion because it's what God's going to do.
Yeah, exactly.
But I do wonder sometimes, if God's already done something, am I going to know if I don't say something, if I don't try? I would never know if God had already started to work on him unless I continue to say things that I think I've already said to him. So if you're out there and you're thinking, I've already had this conversation, don't stop having them because you just don't know.
Yeah, and like it says in I believe it's in Peter, he's not slow as some people consider.
That's right.
He
I know. Here we are thinking why can't you hurry up?
Exactly.
Like to a God who is eternal.
Exactly.
You're acting as though that he's living within your 90-year timeline.
And he, just in the whole experience with my dad, I was able to see how good God is, and just how he just kept him, man. Like my dad basically was an atheist, when we were growing up. And y'all would always ask my mom when we would go to church, a few times we went, why is dad not going? Well, he's kind of an atheist because of Vietnam and, different stuff. And he went through he was in a biker gang. He was actually, president of Banditos, international president. And, he got locked up. He did 10 years in the federal pen when I was like 13 or so. Got cancer while he was in there. And so I think that was God working on him, you know what I'm saying? Because when he got out, one of the times I spoke to him, he was like, I could feel the prayers working and this and that, so that kind of humbled him a little bit.
Yeah.
Got a lung transplant, and it's just like, when I worked up, after I got saved, I had a burden for him, I kind of worked up the nerve to kind of talk about it, and it just felt like something was holding him back. And, I prayed about it. I felt like, he might have been feeling like, he had did so much wrong through everything he did in life that, God wouldn't accept him. So it's funny, like about a week or two before he passed, we were able to spend a whole day together. And one of the things God put in my heart was to tell him, like, hey, Moses was a murderer. Paul, if he didn't kill Christians, he was responsible for persecuting them. And God still used both of these men. He got real quiet and kind of thought about it, and to where like a few weeks later, when he was going to pass away on his deathbed, we were able to, all come down there and be able to pray and say, Dad, just trust Jesus, and him say, okay.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
how many kids did he have?
Just two, me and my sister. So.
You and your sister. So you're the only boy.
Yeah.
Who's older, you or your sister?
I am.
So you're the oldest child. It's hard. And so people listening to this need to know that it's hard to communicate to your parents. They see you still as the kid. And like, what is this? Not what do you know so much, but it's hard to humble yourself. I mean, it might be easier to do it if it was your dad telling you than you telling your dad. So I think that's part of it, right? And so how great is it though that you had a chance to do that, and now you have some peace.
Testimony, and and just awesome. The peace, and not even just being sad when he passed, because I know, and and just finding out in the afterwards, that he had Marine buddies in Vietnam that had got saved, had been praying for him. That I know I had a real godly aunt that had been praying for him, and it's just really been amazing.
That's so cool.
It knocked a lot of the build up around the gospel down to me, to where it's it's so simple. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's just like the thief on the cross.
That's right. And so you might think, well, do I need to know everything in books? Like, no, of course not. The gospel is the kind of thing you can access immediately and then study for the rest of your life.
Yes.
I mean, it's deep and it's available at the same time. So I think that's really cool that you were able to.
And
take that step with
and we're definitely praying.
That's right.
So God's working. And man, that's awesome. I guess just to kind of wrap this thing up, since we're talking about apologetics, what would be some books that you would recommend, like for anybody getting into apologetics? Your books or anything?
Yeah, I think that one of the books. It's like one of my first apologetics books I ever read was well after I was a Christian. I didn't know there was such a thing as apologetics books. But then I discovered C.S. Lewis, and so his stuff. But some people find C.S. Lewis a little bit wordy. I think he's really great, but it's now all Lee Strobel stuff is really accessible and really easy to read. Also, a lot of the stuff from Josh McDowell, early on was really powerful, and he's rewritten a bunch of his books with his son Sean. So you can get a lot of good information from that as well. So and also a good friend of mine, Frank Turek, has a book called Out of Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and he has a book called Stealing from God, which is awesome. So these are all guys who I think at the world of, who are writing, and for kind of a cultural apologetics, like how do I deal with what the world is claiming today? I think people like Elisa Childers are really powerful. So I think there's a lot out there. What's really great about working on any of these platforms, if it's Books A Million or if it's Amazon or whatever it is, almost always when you're looking at someone's book, they'll show you the other ones in the category. And so I think that once you start with something that's accessible, like Frank Turek's book, you're probably going to find mine and Sean's and everybody else are in the bottom stream. So
that's good, man.
It's helpful.
What would be some books that you would recommend just giving to skeptics? If there are any books.
Yeah, so I think this is the hardest. So I'm going to say something to you about that. I know that books do reach skeptics. It's clear they have, and I get people write to me all the time. And so I think that almost any book you would think would help you learn apologetics could also, depending on who the skeptic is, if there's somebody who's like a really high level skeptic, well, there's people like William Lane Craig, the highest level philosopher of Christianity, who has debated more skeptics than any other Christian probably alive. He's somebody you can point resources to, and he's at Reasonable Faith. So that's a great source. If he's a scientific skeptic, people at Reasons to Believe have some great materials like Hugh Ross and Fazal Rana. So those are some people to look at as well. But I think a lot of it for us is going to be, if you know a skeptic personally, then take the time to figure out where the objections really are. You go out and research them, and you be the first presenter of response to because it's always the information connected to a relationship that makes the difference. And if you give him my book, well, he's going to get the information, but I don't have a relationship with that person. If you read my book, well, now suddenly you know everything I know, plus you have the relationship, and now you're able to move forward. So a lot of it, I would say, hey, if it's a skeptic, be slow just to give a book. Be quick to read the books that'll help you respond to your skeptical brain.
That's good, and that kind of ties in with something I wanted to mention earlier too, because it's kind of cliche. People say that your life sometimes is the only Bible some people read, but I think that's a big impact. And even just talking about my dad, the first time I talked to him about me accepting Christ, and he said, well, I have seen a big change in your life.
That's right. So and people want that. So it's been called the fifth gospel in your life. And, even Bobby Conway, who's the 1 minute apologist online, he's written a book called The Fifth Gospel. And what we're really talking about is, what is it about, I always am hesitant in the past about that because it seems like our Mormon families behave more like devout Christians than Christians do often, right? And they'll be surprised that any time that the worldview, the theological system you're in requires you to behave well to be saved, you're probably more likely to behave well because it's required.
That's true.
The problem we have is that we know it's the grace of God that saves us, yet that grace ought to compel us to a changed life. But if you know you don't have to do it, then it's easy to fall back into, well, I'm just trusting the grace of God on that one. And I do this too. We all do this, right? So I think that's part of the trick. That's why I want to go beyond just the life you live, because we're going to encounter people. I've encountered atheists that have better moral fiber than a lot myself. Sometimes I'll think, man, I'm not even as good a guy as that guy, and he's not a believer. So, and I've met lots of guys like that. So I think it's just a matter of us recognizing it's not an either or, it's a both and.
That's good, man. That's good. Well, I think it's been an awesome interview, man, and I thank you again. I appreciate you coming on.
Glad to be able to. Thanks for bringing me out so we can do this.
This is awesome, man. So this has been Set Free Radio. I'm your brother Justin, J. Warner Wallace. Cold Case Christianity, check him out, his podcast, all the books. Personal interest is the very newest one, Cold Case Christianity, Forensic Faith, God's Crime Scene. He's got a bunch of books for kids. It's very awesome. So check him out, man, and let him build, let these resources build your faith, and compel you to go out and spread the gospel. And
that's right.
So appreciate y'all tuning in. We're gonna wrap it up with a little bit of music. Grace and peace. God bless y'all.
The Set Free Radio Show. Truth music for East Texas.